Meeting of the Safety Committee. Pat, are there public speakers?
Yes, there are two.
Good.
Before we do that, could we start with a safety brief?
Sure, please.
Good morning. Your safety is of the utmost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen to the following instructions. In the event of an emergency, 911 should be called. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A, which is located just across the main hallway, or stairwell E down the hall past the elevators. In case of an emergency, notify emergency personnel for assistance. An automated external defibrillator, an AED, for use by trained personnel are in the main hall just outside the elevators, just past the elevators. Thank you. And there are two public speakers. The first is Jason Pinero, followed by H.P. Schroeder.
Good morning, Pat. I want to bring the issue about the homelessness in the system. And I know that you coming from Long Island, you should take a look at the Merrick LIRR station, the Babylon branch. There has been an epidemic of homeless people for many months now. I want you to take a look at that. And this epidemic of the homeless people has gone way beyond New York City Transit territory. So I want you and this board to examine the contract that you guys have with the contractor and to see what options you guys could explore, if it's to change the contractor, amend the contract, or do something, because this is getting way out of hand, and this is affecting thousands of commuters that use not only the railroad, but the subway as well, like myself. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. The next speaker will be H.P. Schroeder.
Schroeder's going to speak at the board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Thanks. Pat, are there any changes to the work plan?
Yes, there are. So the first change is that this meeting was actually scheduled for May previously, and it is today, so it's April. That's one change. And the second one is, and going to the comment from the speaker, is that we will talk about homeless outreach at the July Safety Committee meeting.
Terrific. You want to take us?
Thank you. So I think.
So can I ask you to do this? I don't think that going through, it's in the book, it's available to the board, it's available to the public. I think doing a summary of it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'd ask this question and defer to my colleagues for additional ones. What's the theme or the trend that you see in the safety data that's reported across the agency for the first 2 or 3 months of the year?
So actually for the first few months and for last year, also the safety trend on average is positive in all areas of incidents, accidents, and injuries. So really it's a pretty good story in that regard, but we remain vigilant.
Terrific. So let me ask you one other question, and again, open it up to my colleagues. As the Chief Safety Officer, what's your focus for 2019?
So a couple of things. One, of course, is grade crossings, which we're going to talk about today, which is a significant issue. Right. We're also looking at the issue of trespassing because it's of the cost to not only in human capital and the people who pass away, as well in incidents that when they're on the tracks, as well as the cost of trauma to our own employees, and then just the actual resource cost, to investigate and to handle those kinds of situations. So that's the second one. A third one is looking at contractor compliance and how that works into safety. So those are three of the top areas that we'll be looking at.
Terrific. And Pat, as we go forward during the year, you'll be reporting to the committee and the board on progress on these issues?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Terrific. Thanks. Yeah. Gentlemen, any other questions or thoughts? Including from our labor representatives, who are obviously, they and their folks are on the front line? Okay, terrific. You want to talk about grade crossing safety?
I do. Good morning, and I just want to welcome the new board commissioners that are on the board on this committee with us. So, Commissioner Feinberg and Commissioner Linton, welcome to the team, and I know that you'll be of great value to our committee here. Today we have three special topics. The first is an update on the MTA's Highway Rail Grade Crossing Program, both where Long Island and Metro North Railroads will report on safety activities in 2018 and those planned for 2019. The presentation will be followed by a report by Bridge and Tunnel on bridge closure procedures during emergencies. And lastly, New York City Transit will provide a short overview of their safety activities vis-a-vis the Canarsie Tunnel rehabilitation project. So, starting with the topic of grade crossing safety. A quick look at the national railroad statistics for grade crossing incidents and fatalities shows them to be largely flat, meaning not much, if any, improvement nationally. Can I have the next slide? A highlight, however, is that comparing normalized statistics for our incidents regarding our two railroads, you see that our rates are significantly lower than the national rates. This is good news, and but we always want to improve. Slide, please. Technology that railroads notify their trains of upcoming crossings, which cause them to sound their horns and activate grade crossing warning devices, are well-proven systems. The remaining challenge, however, is to remove the opportunity for pedestrian and motor vehicles to access a crossing, a train crossing. You will hear from both railroads the activities that they are doing to tackle these challenges that are highlighted on this slide. Slide, please. But before you hear about the railroads, let me briefly highlight federal and state requirements regarding grade crossing layout. Bottom line up front, go back one, please. Bottom line up front, there aren't any substantive requirements. For the federal government, there are two simple requirements. The first federal requirement is that all railroads must install emergency notification signs at each crossing, which includes the phone number of the railroad and the crossing ID number. The idea here is that if a vehicle gets stranded at a crossing, the vehicle operator will call the railroad, and the railroad will then suspend rail traffic. The Federal Railroad Administration's second and only other requirement is to record specific attributes regarding each crossing in the National Crossing Inventory. Next slide, thanks. While there are no federal requirements mandating the installation of grade crossing warning devices, if a railroad chooses to install a device, the Federal Highway Administration has regulations regarding their installation. They further have requirements outlined in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices describing the highway warning systems that are required on the approach to the crossing. Sure.
Are there any federal requirements as to the decibel level of the bells at a crossing that must be provided?
Yes. Yes, there are. I don't have them off the top of my head, but there is a requirement for the levels.
Because obviously you hear varying loudness depending on where you are. Yeah.
If you want, I can give that number back to you. Okay. Would you take a note on that? Thanks. Okay. Where was I? Talking about state grade crossing requirements, neither New York or Connecticut states have regulations that mandate the installation of grade crossings or grade crossing warning devices. Similar to what is found in the Federal Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the states do have supplemental requirements for the installation of grade crossings and approach road signs. Let me take a minute to describe the principal and nationally recognized techniques used to protect grade crossings from inadvertent intrusion by vehicles and pedestrians. There are two base categories for protection and warning devices, and they are passive and active. Examples of passive techniques include the use of warning signs and road markings, like crossbucks, the installation of medians and delineators, which restrict vehicle movement from circumventing other grade crossing protections, such as gates, and keeping a clear field of view along the right-of-way so that vehicles can see if a train is approaching. Typical active warning devices, so this is the active kind, include gates and lights. Preemption is a technique where highway traffic lights, so just a standard stoplight, is integrated with the grade crossing warning system to assist in clearing intersections that may have cars backed up over the rail crossings due to a red light. Lastly, cameras are employed in a couple of different ways. In municipalities where permitted, cameras can be used to modify driver behavior by taking a photo of an automobile stopped over railroad tracks and then issuing a summons through the mail as a violation. Currently, the municipalities in our for our railroads do not have this legislation that permits this. However, there's draft legislation has been submitted to the New York State Legislature several times and is currently under consideration to allow this kind of camera use. The other way cameras are used by railroad staff to monitor health and conditions at crossings is to monitor health conditions at crossings. In other words, there's cameras that the dispatchers and the operations centers can look at the crossings, and if there is some kind of alert out there, they can then decide quickly what needs to happen at that crossing. So it's another form of protection. So if there are no further no questions at this time, sir.
Yeah, so just make sure I followed it there. You're saying that there's no legislation enabling discipline of drivers for violating these things, but you can use cameras for us determining there's a problem?
Correct. So sometimes at an intersection, an alarm will go off, that indicating that it's been activated. We can take a look at it and see why it's been activated. If it's a broken device, we can triage that fairly quickly and get that grade crossing back up. If there's somebody if it's activated and we do see somebody there, then we can also react to that.
So what's the issue with the people violating? I mean, was it a civil liberties thing? They don't want they want to protect people that like to drive through grade crossings from fines, or?
Go ahead.
You don't need me to. I mean, Pat doesn't need me to answer for him, but it's a problem in states across the country. Is state legislatures don't want to ticket drivers for violating grade crossings. I mean, you know. Pat, I mean, I'd love to hear what you think, but maybe the MTA board could send a letter to the legislature requesting legislation that would allow ticketing at grade crossings.
I think that's an excellent idea. We ought to do that. We also ought to work with the governor's office, the majority leader, and the speaker to see whether we can advance that this session. I assume, Vinny, from where you sit, you agree.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Excuse me. The one thing I would add is, you know, even the way we can react, obviously we're not going to have the time. I mean, we could have all the notification in the world, but if the gates are down and a train is coming, there's no realistic way that a camera or someone making a phone call or any alerting system is going to give us a response in 15 seconds.
No,
that's how long it's going to take.
Right. I think where states have done it, the purpose is to discipline drivers who have driven around the gates so that they, you know, feel a $250 ticket or a $1,000 ticket so that they don't think it's worth it to do it the next time. But it's definitely not going to.
So let's do this. Let's come up with a plan, Pat, to see whether we can advance this legislatively this session. 1, 2. I think the support and participation of the unions, and it's not only Metro North and Long Island Railroad unions, to some extent it's transit, right? Because there are grade crossings in Brooklyn and Queens, and we ought to cover those. Thirdly, I think we ought to ask that this be treated as a high priority issue, given the unfortunate experience later in the year, and the fact that, you know, every year people around the country are killed, you know, doing these stupid things.
Also,
yes, sir.
You know, I've harped on it in the past, and I really don't like to repeat myself on the board too, but the financial liability falls entirely on us too, and that there should be legislative remedy to where the automobile and truck insurers bear some sort of responsibility in this regard. And you know, I feel all the expenses, all the bad publicity falls on us, and when we're responsible, you know, I'm quite sure the legal department pays out their liability charges, but when the automobiles are responsible, they get a walk.
So let's follow up on Commissioner Brown's comment with the legal department and see what the story is, and see whether that, if it is not covered in current law, whether we can amend that. Thank you for the comment. Andrew.
One last question. Where you have, or where a community, town has installed a raised surface as you approach a grade crossing, have you noticed any change in behavior?
So let me go to the two railroads here.
So a raised surface actually poses a different challenge for us, and we actually had an incident earlier this year where a tractor trailer got caught up on a hump over a raised grade crossing surface. So the high-profile grade crossings actually pose a different challenge and create, the unintended consequences of that is that it does pose a potential risk for other types of vehicles.
You're talking on a median, though, like a raised
Talking
median.
about
About
like some
median?
little, minor little bumps to alert somebody something's changing. Not something that would catch a tractor trailer, obviously. Tactile strip, yes.
Yeah.
So we don't have any tactile strips on our property.
Can I follow up with Lori too? That truck that got stuck up there, I noticed. I mean, I don't know how deep your investigation went into it, but that was a real heavy truck. That wasn't like Home Depot delivery. That was aggregate or something.
And we do have signage to warn drivers of those types of crossings and the risk that it's presenting to those, as part of the MUTCD. That's one of the standard signs. So the signage was there. Again, we tend to find that it's folks that are from out of state and not familiar with the area that tend to find themselves in that situation.
Well, or a guy with a heavy truck taking a shortcut. That's what I was reading into the theory of the case, but I'm a little cynical.
So there is some work, particularly with trucks and these humped crossings, I like to call them, to one, put warning signs out, which is helpful. Two, to try to identify them through organizations like Waze and Google Maps and stuff like that, so that they know where these raised crossings are, because they do tend to bottom out on them if their truck is too low to the ground in the center. So, and it is a challenge. And further, given the fact that we talked about the ENS signs, the emergency notification signs with the phone number and the number, so if they do get stuck, you think that they get off and immediately call that number, but for some reason they do not. They try to get themselves off first, which is a challenge. So that's an educational thing, and something also that we're talking to the federal government and the state about licensing CDL, commercial driver's license, making sure they understand that that's there when they drive their truck into that kind of incident. Okay, if there are no further questions on that, let me go into the railroads, and Lori, would you kick us off?
Sure. So next slide. While we talk a lot about numbers, I just want to take a second to take a step back and put a human face on it. School Street, February 26th, just after 7 p.m., a train traveling eastbound with 85 passengers left Westbury Station traveling at 37 miles an hour. At the same time, a Jeep containing 3 individuals got into a minor fender bender north of the tracks. Fleeing that fender bender, they violated the active crossing warning protection, drove around the gate, drove into the side of that eastbound train, which then 25 seconds later, westbound train carrying 800 passengers into the city made contact with the vehicle, resulting in over 10 injuries. And quite honestly, from a catastrophic standpoint, the 3 individuals lost their lives. And the fact that we didn't have more casualties on the train is remarkable. The locomotive engineer actually spent quite a few days in the hospital. If it wasn't for the efforts of the train crews, the emergency responders, the response at the scene was tremendous, and we thank everybody that helped get us recovered from that, as well as the employees that recovered from the actual infrastructure damages. But going to the next slide. We actually have, and I know we talk a lot about the incidents, but there's also a customer experience impact that happens when we have these grade crossing incidents. The first couple of numbers there, 63, 67, 8 in March alone and 16, relate to our non-reportable grade crossing incidents. So when somebody hits the gates, when somebody drives around the gates, when a pedestrian walks around the gates, all of these reports have an impact on our service. So we had 63 events in 2017 and 67 events in 2018. The reportable grade crossing incidents, we had 17 in 2017, and that's split between people that drove around the gates, people that abandoned their cars because they were became disabled on the crossing. So there's a lot of different things that drive that number, as well as pedestrians that walked around the crossing, activated crossing as well. And I just really want to stress that we have found over the years that is the behavior of the individuals in the vehicles or on foot or on bike or motor, whatever mode of travel that they're using, violating the act of crossing that ends up resulting in these types of events. Tragically, 3 people lost their lives in 2017 and another 3 in 2018. And obviously we have the 3 individuals that lost their lives in February. So there's a lot that goes into what happens at the grade crossing, but the majority of what we see is the behavior of the individuals and the decisions that they're making at that moment. Next slide. Just to give you an order of magnitude, Long Island Railroad transported 89.8 million customers last year. We were founded in 1834. We have over 300 grade crossings. The majority of the communities on Long Island grew up around those grade crossings. So from a complexity and density standpoint, grade crossings have a profound impact on Long Island, and we're very much concerned about how we can manage how communities and folks perceive these crossings. As Pat alluded to, we have a number that have just ENS signs. Those tend to be the crossings further out east that are located, in farms, private properties. We have the passive warning and the active warning. So the numbers on the slide tell you what kind of our inventory of the grade crossings are. Next slide. So we've really focused over the last few decades, to be honest with you, on the 4 E's: education, enforcement, engineering, and elimination. So I want to talk first about education and enforcement. Back in 1982, we had a van of 10 teenagers drive around an active crossing gate in Herricks. 9 of those teenagers lost their lives in that incident. This sparked us to partner with the MTA police to start our TRACS program. Together, Railroads and Communities Keeping Safe. We have a dedicated community relations specialist, and MTA police have 2 dedicated officers, and all they do is go out into communities and educate at all age levels, starting from preschool right on up through driver's ed and commercial companies, about the hazards that grade crossings present, the protections that are available, the penalties that are involved if you violate those protections, with the goal of really saying, hey, listen, you're at a crossing, take a moment before you make that decision to go, whether it's onto the crossing because you're backed up in traffic or around the gates, take a moment to really think about what the catastrophic consequences of that decision may be. They reach, last year alone, over 114,000 participants, and it's a program that's been in place for over 25 years at the Long Island Railroad, and we feel that we've really had great success there. Yes?
Is signage part of the education piece?
Yes, so especially for driver's ed, we really emphasize with those drivers that are learning how to operate their vehicles in the communities on what's important to focus on. And again, so many people have grown up in communities with multiple grade crossings that it really is something that we emphasize.
Yeah, signage is really important. As I recall, there's a rural road in Delaware that Amtrak crosses, and of course they have, the high-speed Acela trains as well, and there's a sign that says, warning, from the time you hear the whistle to the time the train is here is 8 seconds or less. Don't be a statistic or words to that effect,
Yeah.
So signage is really key, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The education, the signage, the enforcement also. I know we talked a little bit about cameras, but the MTA police, we share with them every month the broken gate data so that they can strategically deploy their forces to be able to do enforcement at the grade crossings where we find the behaviors in the most risk.
So do you have like a standard sign, regardless of what community the LIRR is running through, that you use?
So the MUTCD, which is a national standard, is what we follow. So that the prescribed signage, so no matter where you go in the country, if you see certain visual cues, it means the same thing whether you're here in New Jersey or California.
Can a town or area of the island specify they want different signage if they so choose? Or you have to follow the national? We have to follow the national standard and then see if somebody wants something else, how that might fit into that standard.
The states do have a play in this too, though. They can modify, they can add to the rules and add or modify to better, not less.
So again, we have the enforcement efforts and the education efforts, but we're also very conscious, next slide. That's okay. Of improvements that we can make to help aid and facilitate understanding at the crossings. I think one of the most significant and immediate impacts when Phil Eng started as president at the Long Island Railroad last year, he focused us on installing delineators, a very low-tech solution, and working with Waze, a more high-tech solution, to reinforce for drivers at grade crossings what's the right thing to do. So with the delineators, we installed at close to 300 crossings. We started the effort in April. We were done by the end of July, a remarkable effort. By installing the delineators and the reflective striping, it really helped to visually cue, because we had drivers, again, making poor decisions at the crossings, and it tended to be in where there was less visibility or challenging weather, really visually reinforcing for them, hey, don't turn here, or make sure you're aware that there's a crossing. Simultaneously, we were able to leverage an existing partnership that Bridges and Tunnels had to launch our own partnership with Waze to incorporate grade crossings as a hazard on the Waze navigation app. Again, we found that some drivers that when upon further investigation, accidentally turned onto tracks or violated the crossing because they just weren't aware of that it wasn't a driveway or a road that they were turning into. So we were able to pilot 20 crossings by June 7th last year, which was our International Level Grade Crossing Safety Awareness Day. By October of 2018, we got the entire system on Waze so that the drivers get the alerts as they're approaching the crossing and to make them aware.
The implication is they were watching their screen and not the roadway in front of them if they turned onto a railroad track,
Yeah,
right?
and so the audible reminder also is helpful, absolutely. So those are some of the impacts, and we saw an immediate, if you notice, from 2017 to 2018, we went from 17 incidents down to 7 incidents.
There are lots of intersections. You can see this one with delineators on the left-hand side of the screen there, that it is because of all the cement and amount of tracks there, that it does get confusing exactly where the turn is. It's very challenging sometimes. So to get them to pay attention more, like, hey, get your wits about you, you're about to cross a railroad track, is significant.
So next slide. Next slide, we have the cameras, I know, which we touched on already, that the Long Island Railroad is aggressively pursuing installing cameras across our system as well. Right now our focus is on helping to improve our diagnostics at the crossing, as well as being able to see and respond to reports of events at the grade crossings. And obviously from a forensic standpoint, when an incident occurs, it's very helpful, but ultimately we would like to see that being used for enforcement purposes as well, so that drivers are held to account for their behavior at crossings. Next slide. And finally, the most profound thing that you can do at a crossing to eliminate the hazard is to eliminate the crossing. Since 1982, after the Herrick's Road incident, we had only been able to eliminate 2 crossings, Herrick's and Roslyn Road. Fortunately, under the third track Long Island Railroad expansion project, we are actually eliminating 7 crossings, some of which were actually where we saw the most incidents. So 2 of the crossings are being eliminated entirely. They will be closed and no longer available for vehicle traffic. 5 of them are being separated, so there'll be an underpass that directs cars under the railroad infrastructure. So all of that is happening now. 2 of the crossings, Covert and Urban, are in process right now, and our goal is to get them all done through the project, I believe, by the end of 2022. So there's nothing better for grade crossing safety than eliminating the grade crossing itself.
And I think I conveyed to some folks at the Long Island Railroad Committee that we're adding an 8th crossing elimination and also expediting the school and Willis Avenue crossing. So those will be done more than a year earlier than originally planned.
There's nothing like local enforcement and working with the county police and the village police on these crossings. Very important. That's what individuals fear. You know, the bumps and everything else, it works to alert, but nothing like enforcement.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Lori. Justin, can you continue with the Metro North story? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to. I mean, I don't want to come off like an accountant here, but you know, some of the stuff here, I'm curious about, and some of the stuff I feel like you've clearly done your due diligence on this stuff. And when there's a new gizmo we can put in that's going to make our side of it safer, we'll do that. I'm quite sure we'll do that. And when it's possible to eliminate the grade crossing and we can afford it, we'll do that too. And I like to think that the DOT picks up some of this on when you do the grade crossing expense, some of that expense too. But like on the 10 injuries there on the guys that were fleeing the accident caused, are they going to make a legal claim against the railroad? Or we don't know that at this point, but do you feel it's likely they will? And will we end up paying out a legal settlement for something a truck did?
So our legal department actively engages when we have an incident and looks at the liabilities and looks at what claims and what from either side that can be made. So they're very much involved in those that decision making as soon as an event occurs.
Well, I know they're involved in the decision making, but the truck probably only has $1 million cap on the liability, and the damage they cause is in the tens of millions of dollars, and the injuries from thoughts and prayers for the injuries, which some people never recover. Forget about the deaths, but and again, when it's our responsibility, we have liability laws that puts the onus on the railroad to. But the way I look at it is the 99% of this is caused by the automobiles, and 99% of the expense is borne by the railroad.
You need your mic.
The mic's on? I'm sure they'll litigate everybody, probably Nassau County as well. The railroad, even though it's a fruitless effort, they'll still do it. That's the standard operating procedure.
So can I just suggest I think the legal issues are obviously serious. I don't think, given the time allotted, that we ought to spend more time on it. And if it's okay, we'll go back to the Metro North presentation. And you did sound like an accountant, Commissioner Brown.
Well, and I agree with you.
A rare thing.
I agree with you. So I don't want to spend it. I didn't want to spend the time I already spent on it. But could we develop an accounting for what the expense has been for these grade crossing incidences for the railroad, at least going back a couple years? Not to pick out any, go back 5 years or whatever.
Let us take that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're going to start with our most recent incident as well. So on March 25th, we had a grade crossing incident at Corbin Road in Pauling between train 956 and a tractor trailer. The tractor trailer had a possible mechanical failure resulting in the dump trailer detaching from the truck, which you could see in the right photo. This is actually the dump trailer after it was struck by the train, causing it to occupy the Corbin Road grade crossing. This resulted in train 956 striking the dump trailer, spinning it around, and striking the side of the train. So to the right is if you go back to that slide, please. To the right on the picture on the left is the actual cab car. To the left is the actual second car. So this incident resulted in 1 injury to our customer and 3 injuries to employees that were actually deadheading in the train. The train crew, the engineer, and the conductor were not injured as a result of this incident, and they actually did a tremendous job responding to the incident, ensuring their safety and the safety of our customers. If we go on to the next slide, we actually have a video from a motorist at the time. So if we could maybe play that one more time. So you could see the impact actually caused the dump trailer to spin around and do damage to the side of the second car mostly. So we are going after the insurance company of the trucking company, and we actually did some outreach with the trucking company, and we're looking to train all of their employees and drivers as well as part of our TRACS program. So moving on, in 2017 we had 25 non-reportable grade crossing incidents and 27 in 2018. So far year to date we've had 3. And for reportable grade crossings, we had 2 in 2017, 3 in 2018, and the one we just talked about at Corbin Road in 2019. Luckily, none of these have resulted in any fatalities. So looking at our overall view of the grade crossings, we have 66 grade crossings that are public on our system. Of those, 33 are in New York, the other 33 are in Connecticut. All of them are active. We have 35 private grade crossings, 21 with passive warning devices, and the other 14 actually have active warning devices. So touching on education and enforcement, as Lori did, in 2016 we launched our TRACS program, and since its inception we have reached nearly 250,000 individuals. In 2018 the program was recognized by APTA for the Gold Award in Safety, and we also participate in International Level Crossing Awareness Day and Rail Safety Week. Last year during Rail Safety Week we launched our first ever grade crossing poster campaign for K through 12 students. As shown in the picture, Cardinal Hayes in the Bronx was the winner of the 9 to 12 grade crossing category. This is a great way to get our message out to the schools, especially those such as Cardinal Hayes that is directly adjacent to our right-of-way in the Bronx. And through our Way Ahead program, we will continue to expand this program with new innovative ideas. We also have a strong partnership with MTA PD. We share information on a regular basis to help us identify hotspots to strategically plan enforcement efforts. In 2018, MTA PD completed over 1,200 details, issuing over 700 summons and warnings. Next slide. In 2018, like Long Island, we also partner with Ways to improve grade crossing, and through this partnership, motorists are now able to use this app and be warned about grade crossing safety as they approach the grade crossings on Metro North's territory. We also installed delineators at various grade crossings throughout the territory, and we worked with the local authorities to install the delineators up to the crossing to help channel the traffic through the grade crossing. This, along with continuing the road markings through the grade crossings, as you can see the striping continues all the way through, will help us prevent motorists from inadvertently driving onto the tracks. And we continued our aggressive grade crossing surface replacement program, which has replaced over half of all of our grade crossings in the last 4 years. And finally, in 2018, we continued to upgrade our grade crossing flashers to LEDs to provide better visibility. And then finally, our 2019 program basically involves more of the same that's been taking place in 2018 and previous. And we're looking at more resurfacing and road improvements, installation of delineators, and finalizing the upgrades to the grade crossing flashers to LEDs. So all of those will be complete by the end of 2019.
Do you have signage in advance of the grade crossing, like grade crossing ahead? Not when you just arrive at it, but I don't know, 100 yards in front of it or anything like that?
Yes, at certain locations we do.
My apologies for being late today. Justin, some time ago we got money to redesign and fix 3 of the grade crossings on the Port Jervis line. And to Norman's point, we had funding via DOT to do this, as the road needs some significant work and the traffic lights need some smartening up. There is some construction going on in those sites. Could you, for the following, well, how about next month at Metro North, could you give me a report on what the status of those might be?
Most definitely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So can I make 2 points? One is people get so many safety messages and communications in their lives. People are busy. I wonder whether there is a best in breed in the country in communicating on grade crossing safety. And I wonder who's most efficient. And it'd be interesting to see what's out there and what, based on data, is most effective in changing people's behavior. The second thing is I've got an update to the point that Commissioner Feinberg made before on the possible passage of legislation at the state level. I thought this was the case, but I wanted to confirm before I said it in a public meeting. The governor's office has introduced this session legislation on grade crossing safety, as we discussed before, looking for legislative sponsors. So perhaps Vinny and Norman and everybody around the table, we ought to focus our efforts in terms of getting sponsors in the Senate and the Assembly to see whether we can move this forward. And let's talk about that effort offline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Justin. So now let's switch gears and highlight the procedures that our Bridge and Tunnel Safety and Emergency Management team have put into place that increase safety and save resources during the winter storm season. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Pat. I want to take a few minutes this morning to discuss Bridges and Tunnels' contribution in maintaining regional mobility, especially during inclement weather. Bridges and Tunnels works closely with the Transportation Operations Coordinating Committee, or TRANSCOM, to communicate weather conditions so that in the event of a road restriction or a closure to, say, sustained winds, the message is communicated to our regional partners and directly to our customers through travel applications such as Waze. Wind speeds determine restriction on our bridges and is based on our policies and interagency protocols, where restrictions occur at different phases, ultimately leading to bridge closures where we see sustained winds of greater than 60 miles per hour. Next slide. On February 24th and 25th, there were wind restrictions on all of our suspension bridges. Since we knew the weather event was coming, we communicated the event in advance and the pending restrictions based on a forecast of sustained winds greater than 50 miles per hour. This gave our customers time to route plan, especially by those driving vehicles barred from our crossings during the event. As you can see, there are simultaneous posts to the Waze application from both Bridges and Tunnels and TRANSCOM. Next slide. This is a similar post that we've had in 2018. These are what the posts look like on Waze prior to weather events. And this messaging complements what's on the highway VMSs populated by TRANSCOM. Next slide. As far as the tools we have to promote route planning, this is a powerful tool as the algorithm changes within the travel application once a closure is established, redirecting the motorist from the facility. Once our post occurs in Waze, Google Maps picks up the post as well. Once we reopen the roadway, changes to the application are reverted to normal traffic patterns within a couple of minutes. Last slide. Due to our partnership with Waze and TRANSCOM, the trucking industry has expressed their appreciation as having this information gives them time to plan. This planning has a ripple effect as trucks can park prior to the pending restrictions, or they can plan alternate routes. This removes trucks from the roads and reduces congestion. This also allows truckers to use their mandated reset time more effectively, as if they know of restrictions beforehand, they can use the time to satisfy mandatory DOT limits on the number of continuous hours a trucker can drive without stopping. This ultimately allows for cost savings. And I'd like to add that I did have the opportunity to interview one of the leads at TRANSCOM, and the feedback that he received from the trucking industry was most appreciative because of the information and the unified approach that we're providing to the trucking industry on communication. It absolutely saves them time and gives them an opportunity to plan. So that's ultimately the take-home message here.
And Pat, I just want to add, Danny's on here. I just want to add, it's a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach. So based on the weather forecast, we're able to do this working with our regional partners through our command centers. Port Authority was instrumental in the example that Eric gave, because once Port Authority put the messaging out in New Jersey, we definitely saw a drop in truck traffic around the region, and that helps us, that helps NYPD, that helps Port Authority to manage the traffic. And thanks to headquarters for the support, because we had to put this out way in advance of the weather forecast. Sometimes that gets a little tricky, but with everybody working together, it was a success. We had no incidents that occurred during that storm. We had an excess of 80-mile-an-hour winds at some of our facilities, so thank you.
Okay, can I just raise this question? I'd love to discuss it at the next meeting. We don't need to take time now. Waze works on crowdsourcing, right? You turn on the Waze app and it says there are 35,000 Wazers around us. In the event of a facility closing, what does Waze do to make sure that we don't have double the number of vehicles, trucks, passenger cars kind of going to the same facility? And in terms of being able to kind of equitably, if that's the right word, distribute it. And I just post that question if we could come back. Commissioner.
Very good.
I had one question, but no, Waze works on a combination of crowdsourcing and GPS locating based on the number of phones they see active in the moment. So it's actually less about people reaching into Waze and more about them understanding Waze where the phones are. Right. So can the trucks actually, do we have an alert system that the trucking companies can sign up to? Or do they have to go into Waze and Google Maps before they start the trip?
My understanding is that the trucking industry and the GPSs that they use, because they have their own trucking applications, that this information is scraped. So once it goes to Waze, it starts to spread in other different applications. So that's one means and methods of how they see it as well.
But it wouldn't be complicated to set up an alert system, would it?
No, Transcom is instrumental in that. Once we get it to Transcom, they get it out to the region, and then actually we notify the trucking industries to let them know that there's going to be restrictions coming ahead.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Okay. With the understanding that you've received multiple briefings regarding the Canarsie Tunnel Rehabilitation Project, we felt prudent, though, to have New York City Transit quickly describe the significant due diligence that they have put into the safety of that project. So let me turn it over to Bobby Dew.
Sure. Thank you and good morning. Go to the next slide. This, the slide that you're looking at right now is our alternate route map of what's going to happen when the L train starts doing rehabilitation. Our foremost goal is ensuring the safety of our customers and employees, and we will be working with NYPD to keep trains moving while ensuring safe conditions on stations. One thing I'd like to stress, though, is the importance of our customers taking advantage of the alternative routes that we have actually designated. The alternative routes can carry the ridership affected from the L train plan. I know that Andy put this out on Monday. Showed everyone this pamphlet that is going out to actually describe the alternative service, and it's something that people should really consider. It will definitely help us. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, thanks a lot, Bobby. That's all we got.
Any Commissioner?
Excuse me. So maybe new business item. We spoke earlier a lot about some tragic accidents and different types of incidents, and we recognized and showed compassion to the injuries that are sustained for the employees and whoever's involved. I think this committee needs to take a closer look at an on-the-job injury that I believe we struggle to address, and that's trauma. That's the stress and the post-traumatic stress diagnosis that a lot of these employees are experiencing after the fact. It's been new. I've been doing this a long time, and it hasn't been a common practice, and it hasn't been something that we've been tracking at a high number. But, the Westbury incident is a perfect example. We have locomotive engineers bailing out of operating cabs before impact. We have conductors having to go on the ground and try to recognize if there's lives that maybe are savable. And then when we gather and when we support them and we get them together, it's always about, are you okay? I banged my knee, this kind of stuff, hospital, released. But that's not the case. And we've been struggling a little bit because we're geared towards on-the-job injuries relative to medical, physical injury. And I don't think we have the resources in the proper places that can address a lot of the problems we're having with trauma and post-traumatic stress. And the Long Island Railroad is great and compassionate, but sometimes a month later we have people getting pushed to go back to work, or we're getting into disputes and utilizing collective bargaining to argue whether or not someone should or should not be out. And that's frustrating to me because, again, I'm not a mental health expert, but I certainly know, and I know with your military background, you have to be compassionate to post-traumatic stress issues, and I believe, being with a lot of these employees, that we owe it to them to take a better look at it.
Gorman? You have anything on the issue?
I was going to say, Pat Warren, don't we have a mental health program at MTA?
We do have one at MTA, and we always can be better and take a look at it and fine tune it. But we'll get back to you and maybe give you a briefing on what we do, and then maybe there's some ideas on further work that could be done.
Yeah, listen, we have the employee assistance program on the Long Island Railroad is second to none. They know how to put people to the right resources. It's the follow-up, it's the medical reviews afterward that I don't necessarily know we're as in tune with, because it just becomes, well, what's wrong with that person now? Because they don't have a physical injury. We don't always have to have broken bones and major lacerations to be hurt.
No, I'd welcome the opportunity to further discuss this because as people probably are aware, while we've had a long-standing program at the Long Island Railroad for addressing these types of traumatic incidents, it's now also federally regulated through the Critical Incident Stress Plan requirements through the Federal Railroad Administration. And obviously there's OSHA regulations that if an individual is under the care of a treating medical professional, which includes a mental health professional, that they are following, if they're following the treatment plan, and we have that diagnosis and the treatment plan, that the Long Island Railroad honors that and is actually regulated to honor those types of commitments. So I welcome having further conversations if somehow that's not working the way that it's regulated and as we've practiced for quite some time.
Commissioner.
Thank Lori for bringing that up. I mean, we're familiar with the FRA stuff, and a question I was going to have was, first of all, whatever happens on the railroads, I mean, I feel the railroads are sensitive to the problem and really don't know how to entirely address it. It's, people are imperfect and each one's, going to be followed in a different way. But the transit authority, everything that happens on a railroad happens 10 times in a transit authority. And because of the compacted space, they have so many people that are affected by each one of these incidents, and we have dozens on the railroad of these incidents, but they have hundreds each year of these incidents. And I was curious whether the FTA requirements are the same, if they have the same sort of mental trauma things that the FRA has done.
So I'll get back to you on the exact requirement for the FTAs, but I don't think it's as near as bold as it is for the FRA, for the Railroad Administration. But what we try to do is have the same standard across our entire authority. So, but we'll get back to you and get you some more information.
So here's what I'd like to suggest. This is a serious issue and a real one. Why don't we take a look at our programs at Long Island Railroad, Metro North, and New York City Transit. Let's also, at some appropriate time, include representatives from the relevant unions at the Long Island Railroad, Metro North, and New York City Transit, because I think Vinny has raised an important and real issue, and let's do that work and find a time in the next couple of months to report back to this committee and the public. Any other questions before we break? All right, I will take a motion to adjourn. The next committee meeting, next meeting of the Safety Committee will be sometime in July at a date to be scheduled, hopefully at your mutual convenience. Motion? Second? All in favor? Thank you all.